The Fantasy Six-Pack Hour. With your hosts, Joe Bond.
You're awful.
And AJ Applegarth.
It's Sin Shu Chu. It's a mouthful.
All right. Welcome to the Fantasy Six-Pack Hour. My name is Joe Bond, founder of FantasySixPack.net. With me, as usual, co-host AJ Applegarth. How's it going, man?
Great. It's going great. What's happening? How are you?
So enthusiastic. It's unusual for you.
I've been, relegated to Eeyore status, I feel like, on certain shows. So I'm trying to pep things up here a bit. And
sure, man.
Be excited.
Tigger instead. That's fine. I love it.
For the show, we have a great guest. I have a full growler of beer that will not be full by the time the show is over.
Hopefully empty.
We're talking about football. Okay, football.
Sorry,
baseball. It may be America's pastime, but you're past your prime. So go hang out with LaRussa and his nonsense somewhere.
Oh, man.
Sorry, Jeff.
Low blow, man. Low blow to the producer who can't say anything on the show. All right.
Okay, first of all, you guys.
Oh, geez, there he goes. What did you just do?
A way to do that.
Yes, he does.
I don't know why you would even open that door, but congratulations on making the intro. That
I kind of wanted
your fault.
I kind of wanted him to.
Yes.
Anyway. Yes, so as AJ alluded to, we are jumping into fantasy football, moving away from fantasy baseball. It won't be totally ignored. It's some big news to talk about, but you guys can still hit me up on Twitter for comments. There's still, for questions. There's still a lot of content up on Fantasy Six-Pack for baseball, and, it's the teams are kind of running themselves right now. There's a lot of injuries. Guess what, guys? That's not changing. So good luck. Yeah. That's kind of where we're at. So
when we started talking baseball, there were injuries. And now that we're done talking baseball, guess what? There's still injuries.
There's more injuries. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Before we jump into things, just want to remind everybody, hit that subscribe button, that like button, that, leave a comment wherever you are, review. For everybody watching or listening, it is greatly appreciated. We appreciate your support. And without further ado, let's bring in our guest of the hour, Mr. Chris Allen from 4 for 4, Number Fire, and NBC Sports Edge, and probably our favorite thing, Mr. Homebrewer.
Mm-hmm.
Welcome back to the show, man. It's great to have you back. We always like to have you on, and we're going to be talking some best ball today with you, as you are a best ball extraordinaire.
I don't know about all of that.
For sure.
I mean, I like to write about it. I do have this awful tendency of whenever I see a draft available, somebody's like tweeting, like you scroll through your Twitter timeline and you see folks like Underdog. I'm doing this $3 draft, doing this $5 draft, and it's just like, I got 45 minutes. Like, all right, pal, let's go ahead and let's knock it out. Let's go ahead and do that. So I like the strategy that's involved with it. I've been studying, well, not studying. That makes me sound like some sort of book nerd, but like I've been just looking into the different ways you can go about making optimal decisions when it comes to building your rosters for the last couple of seasons.
That's what it's all about, though, man. Like that helps you tremendously in best ball for sure. Almost more than like redraft, because with redrafts and stuff, you can adjust during the season. In best ball, you have to draft correctly. If not, you're screwed. So, but we're getting into that later. Let's do our favorite segment of the week and beer of the week.
Beer.
All right, man. Mr. Homebrewer, what do you got on tap for us?
I think I previewed this one, I think the last time I might have been on, but this is actually a recipe.
Special?
Because I've been working on this recipe for the last year-ish or so.
All
so
right.
This is a Milkshake IPA. So it has the
familiar.
IPA with it, but also has the lactose added to it as well. Along with a combination of, let's say, like the tropical hops, like the mosaics, the citras, any of those types. I call it I am fruit. the play on the MCU like I am Groot thing.
Yeah.
But I do
That's funny.
I do a lot of that like because I really like this style. Like with a lot of, I guess, hate that IPAs get, like being like, the bitter beers, like so on and so forth. I like making an IPA, but I like something that it's more palatable to me. And I do like that sweet finish that you get with adding the lactose to it. Also with like the hops that the hop combination that I have, it keeps it like fairly flavorful as well. And then also I'm 38 years old. I can't do a 9%, like what AJ has. I can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
Like I need something that's more
I'm
like
40 and I can't. So
I can't do
on,
it
bro.
anymore.
I'm 39
man.
and I'm still doing it. I probably shouldn't, but okay.
I can't.
I appreciate it.
6%. Like this is like 5.6, 5.7%. And I can kick it with this like all day without an issue.
Oh yeah, no. So I'm not doing this all day. This is
See
I'll drink
those
for, like, a few
I
hours and
drink
I'm
I
done.
drink one and then my wife would probably just like cut me off and she'd be like, you need to go to bed, like you're done for the day. Like it's a wrap.
You're
after
not
that.
even
Mine
making
just leaves
sense
me
anymore.
alone.
Just
just
go away.
Yeah,
You're actually annoying me. So if you could stop doing that, that'd be great.
that'd be my life if I drank one of those.
No,
Yeah, I hear it.
I like I like dipping down into the lower. I mean, I feel like a bit of a beer snob because I'm always drinking doubles and occasional triples and whatnot. Maybe I've just built my tolerance, unfortunately, up this high, which is probably a bad thing for my liver. But
hey, we're getting ready for the expo.
I'm just
Yeah.
planning. I'm pre-planning, so I'm getting prepared for things. But yeah, I definitely like trying to find something that's not crazy percentage every week and be like, okay, well this is a little lower. Let me try this. This seems like something that's just crushable and I could pound like a 6-pack of these or something.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm still just like, whoa, all right, that was a bad idea. But I like it.
All right, what you got, man?
All right, so I am drinking out of my Maryland flag flavored Bog Turtle
I love
Brewery
that.
special.
Absolutely.
Shout out Maryland, shout out Bog Turtle. This is their Papa Hoppa. It is 8.1%er double imperial IPA. It is absolutely delicious. I tried it the other night when I went up there to pick up dinner and decided I had to get a growler of it, and probably will get another growler of it. I don't know, tomorrow. It's awesome. It's really good.
Gotta get some for the weekend because you're gonna drink the rest of it tonight.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, I'm drinking one of the ones that you dropped off with me on my birthday, thankfully.
Stickman.
This is a Stickman Brews double deuce double IPA. I think this ended up being like a 9.5%. It doesn't actually say it on the can anywhere randomly, but it is good, man. I gave it a 4.5. It's super smooth. I'm a big fan of this one, so I liked it a lot. Hopefully will last me the full show. I hope I don't have to kick in my other one because 9.5 is pretty heavy.
Stop fooling yourself.
Yeah,
it probably will, but yeah, it's okay.
I'll take the under.
All right, well let's jump into some football here, and before we get into the best ball strategy, we got to talk about this Julio Jones trade that just happened over the this last week. We hadn't been able to talk about it yet. Julio obviously traded to Tennessee for picks and whatnot. Really, probably not enough in return, really, if you think about it. But there's a lot to break down here. What does this do for the players on Atlanta? What does this do for the players in Tennessee? This affects a lot of players. Chris, your thoughts first on how this affects Ridley and Pitts and Matt Ryan and company in Atlanta.
I think for Calvin Ridley specifically, I mean, a lot of folks were already evaluating him as like a wide receiver one or in like at least the top 5, top 6 range. I mean, if anything now with his projected volume, he could really move into that DeAndre Hopkins like level of usage, right? Like where we're talking about a 27, 28, 29% target share within an offense that we know is going to be passing at like top 3, top 4, like neutral passing rates. And even though the concerns, I understand the concerns regarding like Matt Ryan in terms of his efficiency once you get into the red zone. So like while the touchdowns like might not be there, again, from a total volume perspective, I compare those situations like fairly similarly when it was Deshaun Watson and Nuke Hopkins, and now it's going to be like Matt Ryan and Calvin Ridley. And Calvin Ridley, like the pass catcher, like the wide receiver one in that sense, is really the one that benefits the most from it. Because like Deshaun Watson, like for as good as he was, especially in the seasons where he had Nuke, like he really got most of it done on like if not through passing, but also with his legs as well. Matt Ryan doesn't have that. So we really do have to kind of take a step back from Matt Ryan and think of, I mean, what value does he really offer as a primarily like statuesque like type quarterback? And if he loses one of his pass catchers, arguably one of the best pass catchers in the league, we can't view him as a top 12 quarterback as we had in seasons past. So I'm looking at Calvin Ridley, wide receiver one, I mean, top 3, top 5, like somewhere in that range. Matt Ryan definitely takes a step back, move him out of the top 12 into one of those, like, I mean, he could definitely be one of your like high-end streamers. Like if you want to go the late round quarterback strategy after most of all of the rushing quarterbacks are taken, and he definitely falls behind Ryan Tannehill, which we'll probably talk about here shortly. But like he falls out of that like top tier of quarterbacks that most folks be wanting to draft, either whether it's best ball redraft or whatever. But for Kyle Pitts, at least for me, I couldn't buy into Kyle Pitts at his ADP where it had been around like the tight end 4, like tight end 5, like probably right after the big 3. So Kelsey, Kittle, Waller. And then like right after that, I saw most folks taking Pitts like right there. I couldn't buy into that with Julio Jones being in the offense. But now, if we're thinking about a high volume passing rate offense, now Julio Jones is not going to be there. I mean, even if Kyle Pitts was there, with the draft capital that the Falcons used in order to draft him, we could already kind of pencil him in for at least a 16, 17% target share, which in an offense that's probably going to have 550 passing attempts, that's good volume. But now if we also take away Julio Jones, we're expecting even more volume, and the competition level for targets, it's really Calvin Ridley, Kyle Pitts, and then a bunch of other dudes.
Russell Gage.
It's Russell Gage.
People are loving Russell Gage now, man.
He profiles as a slot receiver. I get it. The one thing that I do have some concern with is the fact that Russell Gage does profile as a straight slot receiver, but Arthur Smith coming down from Tennessee, he was running 2 tight end sets at like the second and third highest rate in the league. So if we're expecting 2 tight end sets, where does Russell Gage fit into that? You could wind up seeing like Frank Darby, Olamide Zaccheaus, any of these other guys, at least picking up some of those targets to take some of the shine off of a guy like Russell Gage. I mean, heck, we could even see Mike Davis catching some more passes out of the backfield if you think that he still has. I mean, he could be most of what he was when he was in Carolina. So it's just I'm still focused on like the core pieces of that offense. So Calvin Ridley, Pitts, now I'm more comfortable taking him at ADP. Mike Davis, depending on where he falls at. But, I mean, Matt Ryan, no, I'd rather take any of the other quarterbacks that are going ahead of him or around him at this point. And then I might take a few splash shots on some of the other ancillary receivers. But I think at this point, Russell Gage, like the hype train is just so high that I might be out on Gage at cost, and I might pivot to some of the other guys that it could be Hayden Hurst. I mean, if they're running 2 tight end sets, Hayden Hurst could get some targets.
And his ADP is super low
he's
still.
Free.
He's totally free. He's not getting drafted in most leagues, and in best ball leagues and things like that, he's like one of the last rounds. It's just
he
kind of
like get some targets. Zaccheaus get some targets.
Just throw a dart at him. Why not?
Yeah, why not?
I get it.
Yeah, so that's where I'm at with the at least.
I agree with everything you just said. I'm a little gun shy on Pitt still, but you hear a lot about the fact that like people think they're gonna use him as basically like a wide receiver 2. I'm not sure I totally buy into that, but he's got the skill set to do. He's got the body to do it still. Like he is kind of more of a receiver when you look at him. So could see it happen. But yeah, I'm Ridley's is going to be a target hog. He's going to be Julio, before him. And yeah, the touchdowns, you're right, may not be there. So, but Julio still was the wide receiver 1 for how many years without touchdowns? It's just, especially in PPR leagues, like he's gold. AJ, Tennessee side, what does this do?
He's gold, but he's also gold without the G. He's old, and
Ridley?
just no. I'm talking about Julio.
Oh, I hadn't gotten there yet.
You said from the Tennessee side. Did you not?
I was just about to ask.
Tennessee?
I was just about to ask you the question. You jumped in, so let me ask the question first. So Tennessee side, we're looking at obviously Julio. What's his value moving over? Is it better or worse than it was in Atlanta? How does this affect AJ Brown? How does this affect Tannehill? And then I think a lot of people still wonder, how does this affect Henry? Nobody cares about the running game in Atlanta, really. And Mike Davis is kind of the guy. But Henry's obviously a stud, but they lost a lot of pieces in this offseason. And so some people were a little worried about him. Does Julio coming in actually help or hurt Henry?
So again,
take whichever
Julio's
way you wanted
gold,
to start with that.
But he's also gold without the G, and he's old. There hasn't really been a lot of older receivers that have come in and put up his type of numbers that he's used to seeing at that age, season. But he hasn't really ever had a running game in Atlanta. I mean, who has he had there? Gurley's busted up knees last year. Great, cool. He's never had that aspect. So the nice thing about this is
they've had at least 1 or 2 guys, but yeah, the running game hasn't been phenomenal there. But they've had 1 or 2 guys, and it's
you
totally
want to go back to 1998 and Jamal Anderson? Cool, but was Julio there then? No.
Devonta Freeman was solid, like what that.
Freeman had some good seasons. I will give you that. But in general, overall, it's been more of a pass-heavy offense than a run-heavy offense.
Mm-hmm.
Now, coming to Tennessee, he's got Tannehill, who's extremely efficient. And I don't think he changes a whole lot. Maybe gets a slight uptick from me for Tannehill. But, I mean, Jones, I think, if anything, he's going to just take eyes away from A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown could have been a top 5 receiver before this trade. And I don't know if he really moves out of that spot. I think people are going to have to focus on Julio. And if they don't focus on Julio and they want to double team Brown, then Julio's going to burn you. And then they're going to be, oh, crap, we should pay attention to him. And then Brown's going to burn you. So I still think that there's going to be some games with Tannehill. I mean, he doesn't throw a lot. So he's efficient with the throws he makes, but his volume is not very high. So I think overall that's going to affect Julio's, numbers, reception wise. The yards I think could be hurt a little bit, but I'm not too concerned with them. If anything, his touchdowns have to go up. That's almost a given.
That's not totally hard.
He really just needs to get 1, maybe 2, and he's at his career high. So it's amazing. I love what this does for Henry, though, because he's just a stud regardless. And all eyes were always going to be on him. And then Brown came through and broke out. So it's like, well, crap. Now we got 2 guys we got to try to focus on. I mean, it's just going to be a nightmare for defensive coordinators.
I think to me, to quick sum this up, is that I think this helps Henry. Honestly, I did have a little bit of worry about Henry with only A.J. Brown and Ferkser there, and maybe Josh Reynolds. Who cared?
All right, you love Ferkser. Stop it.
I mean, I did until now. He was my second tight end in a best ball that I drafted on RT Sports not too long ago. My first is Waller, so it's not a total loss. Like Waller is going to be there every week, but still. Ferkser was like, oh, I mean, he's like the only target else there, besides AJ Brown, but no, well, whatever. Anyway, back to Henry real quick. I think this helps him because I think it's going to take eyes off of him, and they're going to have to defenses are going to have to play the pass, even more than they did last year. This is still going to be a run-first offense. I mean, the only concern at this point with Henry is the massive workload he's had 2 years in a row. So, when's it going to catch up to him? But,
I mean,
until we see it, honestly, like I'm
not worried about it until it does.
Yeah.
And it will probably be this year because I'll probably draft him first round and F everybody that drafts him. So I'm sorry in advance, people.
You telling me if you got him in one league and I'm out.
I already do. So
geez. Okay, guys, just get rid of him. All right,
don't draft him.
Let's jump into some best ball here, and I mean, just quick first question here for you, Chris, is that there's a bunch of different sites that do this, and we've already mentioned Underdog, we've mentioned RT Sports. There's obviously Fantrax that does best ball. What's your preferred site here, and if you have a couple, like what's the differences between them that you know of?
So the two that I primarily play at, I typically play at three, like Best Ball 10s, Fanball, Best Ball 10s, FFPC, and then now Underdog. I've kind of condensed most of my portfolio to Underdog and FFPC, and that's for a couple of different reasons. Like Underdog, because I absolutely love their app. I mean, not going to lie, just the convenience of being able to just sit down, oh shoot, I'm on the clock, look up, swipe, grab my, pick my player. It's very convenient. I thought, I mean, they've knocked it out of the park because I know a lot of folks were even complaining to MFL when MFL was doing best balls like 3-4 years ago. Everybody was asking for them to come out with a nice, clean app for folks to access their rosters via the phone.
Anything
impossible.
And they still don't have anything. But then, I mean, Underdog came in and they did the thing that we've been asking any platform to do.
I will say the only knock on Underdog that I say is, and I love like the interface and everything. Mm-hmm. The only knock I have is like you sign up for a random draft, and if like you randomly aren't available real quick, it's gonna auto draft your entire team for you. And you're well, that sucks. So that does suck. You're like, I'd rather have like a set time. Like, okay, I want to draft at 9 p.m. Like, I know when it's going to start, and I'm going to be available. Like, give me at least 2 hour heads up or something. Like, let me know. Like, I joined a baseball one this past year, and all of a sudden it was just like, your draft's going to start in 2 minutes. And I was like, oh, what?
Yeah.
Thankfully, I was available.
Yeah. But of course, the big thing with Underdog is that it's half point PPR. Most of the other platforms, I mean, even if you go to like Best Ball 10s, Drafters, I mean, any of the other sites, like most of them are full PPR. And then over at FFPC, while it is PPR, it's also tight end premium. So that's where you'll see a lot of the tight ends like going like the ADP for tight ends just completely off of what you would see in a casual draft or pretty much anywhere else like in the industry. So that's where you do have to pay some a bit more attention to positional value throughout the early parts of the draft, because you can see a guy like Tyler Higbee going around the same time folks are drafting like Cortland Sutton or somebody similar to that in terms of ADP. So that's why I like doing both of those, because it helps keep me in the right mindset of not just focusing on the scoring format, but also looking at positional value and understanding opportunity cost, because those are the two big things that can at least help drive you to optimal decisions when you're deciding on whether or not you should take Tyler Lockett versus Mike Davis or whatever the case may be. Because if you try and adhere to just the optimal roster construction guidelines and also factor in opportunity cost, you can wind up taking down a league at least and get a decent ROI off of drafting quite a few teams doing it that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So speaking of team construction here, I mean, obviously it's really important in every league. You're not going to just go in and throw it in and not worry about it. But I feel like it seems to be way more important in best ball because you don't have waivers a lot of the times. You have your article on 4for4 about winning roster construction. Can you dive into that a little bit for us and explain some of the things that you noticed and different things that you've learned from last season even and doing this?
Yeah. So I would say that right off the bat, the win rates and the different roster constructions that we posted there, while it's focused on FFPC and that's the data that was collected for it. Shout out to Kevin at 444 for doing most of the data crunching for us. But while it's focused for FFPC, I think a lot of the guidelines that are there can be used across like multiple platforms. Like just something as simple as don't go off and draft like 5 quarterbacks. You really need to keep it into the 2 to 3 range. I mean, that's something you can apply to any site that you go to. If you're drafting running backs early, don't also be drafting running backs early and late and taking a lot of them. I mean, again, guidelines that you can use across different platforms. Wide receivers are likely going to, if you're trying to acquire a bunch of them in the middle rounds, like let's say rounds like 3 through 8 or like 4 through 9 or 10 or somewhere in there where we're getting a lot of those wide receiver 2s or guys with a decent amount of upside, that's good, but you should also try and factor in some of the elite wide receivers that we know are going to have higher target shares, like the Tyreek Hills, the Stephon Diggs, the Devontae Adams of the world, that could also help boost your win rate as well. That's why, at least I don't think like strategies like the robust RB and things like that, I think folks go a bit overboard in that area because they do want to try and lock up a position as early as possible, but you do wind up sacrificing enough opportunity cost that, let's say you go 4 or 5 rounds of nothing but running backs, and then your first wide receiver is, let's say, Cortland Sutton or Jerry Jeudy or somebody like that, where on paper that could look good, but now think about the rest of the wide receivers that you passed up in order to draft all of those running backs in the earlier rounds. So it's just trying to understand that, especially in the early rounds where we know that opportunity cost is the highest, because we do know that most of the players drafted their ADPs, they have the highest amount of like points per game. At least that's the expected output based off their ADP. That's where we want to make the best decisions. And like in the first like 6 to 7 rounds, that's where we can get like the core of our rosters. And then shortly after that, especially after we get past like the running back dead zone, we start drafting more quarterbacks. That's where we can start taking our shots. So to be optimal early, that's really one of the biggest guidelines that I've found, at least in terms of roster construction. So instead of going overboard on a single position, try and stay as balanced as possible, not trying and drafting, let's say, even at FFPC, drafting 3 tight ends early because it's a tight end premium. No. You should be really trying to focus on maybe grabbing 1, 2 possibly, and then focusing on the running back and wide receiver positions as well, because again, you want to be able to lock up at least a decent number of touches for the running back position early, elite wide receiver production early, and then being able to balance all that and then take your shots later on any of the other guys. So that's typically how I go about looking at like putting together some of those articles, because again, it's all about following some of those optimal guidelines while still making at least at least accounting for not roster construction, but the opportunity cost associated with making any of those picks there.
So interesting. You talked about, not going too heavy into one position and, opportunity costs. Do you find yourself, and this is the question I didn't put on the sheet for you, but something I just thought about, do you find yourself going earlier running back or earlier receiver when you have the choice?
It just depends on, I hate giving the cop-out answer of it depends, but it really does depend on your draft slot, right? Because if you think of like the first round, like if you're in a 12-team best ball league, first 12 picks, first 5 of those are typically going to be running backs, right? Mm-hmm. It's going to be Derrick Henry, it's going to be CMC, it's going to be Saquon, it's going to be Alvin Kamara. Well, right.
Okay, let's exclude the first round. We kind of know how the first round is going to roll with most drafts, right? It's going to be very running back heavy in the very front and then kind of a mixed bag at the back end.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the second round, right? So, like, where you kind of get, you're taking, because we see it every year with running backs, these second, third round running backs that people are just gobbling up because they need running backs or they think they need running backs, right? They don't pan out, but those receivers do more often than not. It feels like that, right? is that where you're maybe grabbing, say you had like one of those first 5-6 picks and you grab one of those top running backs, are you more looking to grab a safer receiver at that point? Or are you looking to grab, maybe another running back because that drop off is so heavy later?
That's again, it depends on the running back, because the thing that I looked at for the FFPC article, guys that wind up hitting in the early rounds, they need to really have not just a high volume in terms of running back carries, but they do need to be at least a decent part of their team's passing game. I mean, other than Derrick Henry, who he needed that Herculean type of workload in order to get to where he was at. I mean, we really weren't able to harness a lot of the fantasy production out of guys that really weren't catching passes there. That's why we gravitate towards Alvin Kamara. That's why we're gravitating towards Cam Akers, Aaron Jones, so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. So really, you do have to wind up picking your spots on the guys that are available in the second and third round, because that's what we need out of those guys. We can't just rely on volume, because we can find similar volume almost at least a round or 2 rounds later, or even if we want to wait towards the back end of the draft in order to find rushing production. So some of those guys, I'm sure we'll wind up talking about it later. It's do I want to take Antonio Gibson, or do I want to take DeAndre Swift? Quite possibly. I mean, because we know that they're going to have at least most of the rushing production, but they're also a part of the passing game. Mm-hmm. Whereas I'd rather pass on a guy like J.K. Dobbins, because we don't know what his passing game use is going to look like, despite whatever the coaches is going to tell us about. Regardless. And also with Gus Edwards and so on and so forth. But it's so that's where you do have to account for that specific player's situation. And in most cases, if Swift, Gibson, Chris Carson to some degree, if most of those guys are already gone, then I will pivot to the wide receiver position, because that's when Michael Thomas is going, Keenan Allen is going. I mean, any of those other wide receivers that Amari Cooper is going in the third round in most cases. I would much rather have those wide receivers going at a similar cost to the guys where we're not clear on what their projected touch is going to be, not just from a rushing standpoint, but also from a passing perspective, which we need to have in the early rounds.
Yeah, no, I get that. It's just something that, when you said what you said, I was like, I wonder. So I totally get what you said, though. The next question on the list here, though, that we had down is, so you talked about, kind of general roster construction strategy, but how have you found your teams kind of laying out after everything is said and done? The majority of them.
The majority of my teams, so let's see, if I flip over to Underdog, so the 18 round drafts, typically it's 2 quarterbacks, 5 running backs. So what is that? 7 to 8 wide receivers. And so that leaves me with 2 tight ends, 3 tight ends. Am I doing the math right? Math in public, 7, 8. Yeah.
I have not yet done an underdog one, so I don't know even the roster spots yet. But I'm
thereabouts is about that. That's about where I've been drafting, or how I've been constructing my teams. But then inside those, if you want to even put each of those positions under the microscope, if I am taking 5 running backs, it's because I took 2 in the first 3 rounds, and then after rounds 8, 9, 10, I wound up picking up 2 or 3 more there afterwards. And then so for that, let's say round 4 to round 10, it is wide receivers, it's maybe a tight end, so a Hawkinson, Mark Andrews, and it's one of the top end rushing quarterbacks, so a Jalen Hurts, a Josh Allen, a Lamar, any of those guys. So that's where I typically try and fill out my wide receiver and quarterback and the onesie positions somewhere in there, and then I'll flip back to the running back position after round 10.
Yeah, I did something very similar in my RT Sports one. I took 2 running backs early, and then it was receiver, and then I told you this, I took Waller at the 3-4 turn. Yeah. It's a PPR league too, and I was like, that's wild that he's there. He never should have fallen that far.
That's absurd.
Yeah.
Obviously, Kelsey went in the first round, Kittle went in the early second round, and then Waller lasted the entire rest of the way, and I was like, click.
Yeah.
So easy call. So I waited on tight end the rest of the way, but I ended up taking a quarterback because Dak fell to the 6th, which I thought was kind of silly. That's so it let me wait on quarterback a little bit longer too, because I thought I had a top 3, 4, 5 guy potentially. But yeah, the rest of it was just kind of mixed bag because I took 2 running backs super early. I didn't take my next 2 until 8, 9. but maybe 7, 8. But then I was like sold. I was like done until much later.
Right.
I just I took a dart throw later and was like, what? It didn't matter.
Well, if you look at the wide receiver scoring, like at least based off of ADP, like if you compare like ADP on the x-axis and then like expected point totals on the y-axis, I mean, wide receivers, they remain like the optimal decision throughout that like 3 to 8 round, like somewhere in there. I know like guys like Jack Miller over at ETR, they've written about like the running back dead zone. And I've seen something similar in my work over at FFPC, because you see like the expected output for running backs, especially in like 4th, 5th, 6th round, I mean, just completely drops off.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not really finding any of those. Yeah, you're not finding the guys that are getting both the rushing and the targets in that area, unless you wind up hitting on a guy like David Montgomery, which required an injury in order to really propel him into like the 2nd and 3rd round. But all the rest of like those wide receivers that are going there, I would much rather have it. I mean, Tyler Lockett, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins. I mean, any of those other guys that are going like in that 4 to 6 range, I'm loading up on those guys all day long.
I got a feeling like round 8, it was crazy.
Because you know you can wind up getting like good
fine.
wide receivers there. And then the running backs that are going to be available in the 9th, 10th, 11th round. So like your Ronald Joneses, your Zach Mosses. I mean, any of those other guys that are going, Damian Harris. I mean, even Michael Carter, if you want to dabble in that. I mean, most of those guys you can wind up falling back and waiting for later when you know you've already secured production at the wide receiver position by that point. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing too, I just wanted to follow up on it with the team construction. So it kind of dips in a little bit with, you know, we've talked a little bit about quarterback injuries specifically and how it seems like every new year that comes up, we just have more and more and more and more injuries to quarterbacks. And it's really not necessarily more. It's been pretty consistent over the handful of years, you know, recently. You know, there has been a few upticks and downticks, but, you know, does that ever weigh in, like injuries in general? But for your quarterback, you said you only draft like 2 quarterbacks typically. I mean, do you ever, if you miss on maybe one of your top 5 guys and then you find yourself getting a later guy who's in your 2nd, 3rd tier, I mean, would you change your draft strategy up and try to go, you know, quarterback, receiver, running back, then quarterback again, pretty close? Or do you not let that weigh in and just not worry about the injury factor at all?
The injury factor, not so much, but but in the case that you described of, let's say if I'm gunning for like Jalen Hurts or one of those other like quarterbacks that's towards like the back end of like that top 12. So like Tom Brady, Joe Burrow, who's getting drafted in the top 12, even like Stafford. If I miss out on like all those guys, am I still taking 2 quarterbacks? If I wind up like my very first quarterback is, let's say, Trevor Lawrence or even like Matt Ryan, like we were talking about earlier. Typically in those cases, I will wind up taking 3 quarterbacks just because if you're thinking about it from a week-to-week standpoint, what's the, like, in terms of like a distribution of points, like what is how many peaks are they going to have like throughout the season?
Yeah.
Whereas with the guys that we're typically drafting in the top 12, like those rushing guys, we know that like in terms of their points distribution throughout the season, they're going to be in the QB1 conversation like almost every week. Doesn't matter what the defensive matchup is going to be, they can get there on their legs. But for the Matt Ryans of the world, the Baker Mayfields of the world, even if you fall all the way back and take somebody like Jared Goff, Ben Roethlisberger, or whatever, that like the probability of that happening is much lower. So then taking 3 does become a more viable option at that point, because you need those requisite points from the quarterback in order to at least propel your team to winning your particular league, whether it's a casual league or you're doing anything like the Best Ball Mania tournament going on at Underdog, any of that stuff. So yeah, I will adjust my strategy based off of the draft capital that I wind up spending at the position. It's almost like with running backs. Like if you're going to take, let's say, if you're going to do like that modified 0 RB strategy that's going on right now, where you take like one like super early like Ezekiel Elliott and then don't draft another one until like round 9, that you're assuming 0 injuries to Zeke, right? You're assuming he is that running back 1, and then all the rest of the running backs that you take afterwards, it's just a conglomerate of RB2s at that point. But you're assuming that that running back that you anchored your team to at the very beginning stays healthy. So like I try not to look at things like from an injury perspective. It's just more of, again, trying to understand the opportunity cost, but then also marrying that with the roster construction. Like if I'm going to take, one running back, I'll probably still wind up with like 5 running backs there at the end, because I don't want to then imbalance my roster by saying, I only took 1 running back, so now I got to take a whole bunch more, and then I'm going to miss out on a bunch of wide receivers instead.
Yep. All right. Any thoughts on that, Joe? Do you flow one way or the other?
I mean, I totally agree. I mean, and I was actually because I'm very novice with best ball. I've done like maybe 4 drafts total in the last couple of years, but I was chatting with I was chatting with you, Chris, during my draft a couple times. I was like, hey, I'm kind of stuck. Like if I go here, I feel like I got to go here. If I go here, I feel like I got to go here the rest of the way. And you kind of agreed with what I said, but I was like, so which way's better? Is what I was asking you. But I was also talking to a couple of the Best Buys, Davis and Preston, who write for Fantasy Sick Pack, and we were kind of chatting the whole draft too, getting their opinion on things. And they were saying very, very similar things as you were, Chris, and to where like I said before, we went kind of early with running backs, so we were able to kind of wait a little bit, and and then we found some value where we didn't think there would be with running backs. We got Mostert and Mike Davis like 7-8 round or whatever it was, and that that's not supposed to be there, right? And so we were like, we got 4 within 8 rounds, and we were like, we're done, like almost forever, and we got 1 more. Like we went in going, we probably should get 6, right? We had 5 at the end, and because of how that ended, again, we didn't go in expecting to get Waller. We got Waller at the beginning of the 4th round. I had the turn pick, so it was one of those like things adjusted because of where the value fell. But and so you have to adjust. But you can go in with like a general roster construction idea,
right?
But obviously things have to adjust if you're going to find value, like I was able to find.
Yeah. And I mean, you hit the nail on the head right there, where you don't enter a draft with a structure already in place. I mean, you might have just like the general guidelines like we were talking about earlier, like 2 to 3 quarterbacks, maybe 4 to 6 running backs, 7 to 9 wide receivers, and maybe 2 to 3 tight ends. Like you want those ranges, right? But once you get into the drafts, if a Darren Waller happens to fall to you in like the 4th round, it's not like you're going to sit there and say, oh, well, it's the running back dead zone, so I got to take wide receivers here, so I'm going to just like completely ignore this value that's presented to me like right in the face. It's like, no, like you take the value that's presented to you, and then you just adjust your strategy like later on down the line. Like say if a guy like Chris Carson were to fall into the 5th round, I'm taking Chris Carson in the 5th round. And then I'll just figuring out my wide receivers and tight ends
the rest later. You'll be good.
You adjust as you go along, and it becomes much easier to think about it in that sense versus saying that I need to adhere to this strategy, so this is how I'm going to like build my roster.
I mean, roster construction is just so different in best ball, mainly just because you have to have backups at every position. Like you can't you can't come out of the draft. We saw some crazy teams that had 1 quarterback, and in RC sports, in RC sports, you have to have a defense and a kicker. We had teams that walked out. We had teams that walked out of my draft with 1 defense and 1 kicker. So thank you guys.
Thank you for your donations.
Anyway, AJ, move on to the next topic.
All right. So this next topic is a little broad here because, in looking through your different articles and stuff, you also dive a lot into the win rate for each specific position. So explain this concept in general for the listeners, and, why to you it's important for best ball specifically to understand win rate, and then how to use it to your advantage.
So I use win rate to kind of pick out how winning teams have constructed their rosters, and even how winning players, like what types of players have wound up on winning rosters. So that's how you can use like win rate to your advantage. So, and like win rate as we define it at 444 is like the percentage of that player or that build being used across all winning teams. I know that RotoViz looks at it from a slightly different perspective because they look at all teams, like both winners and losers. So it changes like based off of how you look at it. I like focusing on like the winning teams, not just because if you find the players, it's like, oh, okay, well, Stephon Diggs like had a high win rate last season. I'm just gonna go ahead and draft I'm gonna draft like Stephon Diggs like next season. Like no. It doesn't work that way. At least it might in Diggs' case, it might absolutely it might wind up like working that way. But the way that I've broken it down in my articles is that if you understand the type of player that's winning. So if you're looking at not just win rate, but you marry win rate and the ADP that player was taking at, that he was taken at, and then also the type of production or like the volume that they see, that's where you can start to work the problem backwards and say, this is the archetype of player that I should be looking for in this area of the draft. Like the name of the player should not be what you go into your draft saying that you're going to select. Like you shouldn't go into your draft saying that I'm going to select Stephon Diggs like no matter what. Like, no, the way that you should look at it is say that I'm drafting from, let's say, like the 10th slot in the draft. And I know that once I get to the back end of this draft, these types of players will be available to me. And this type of player that fits to a Stephon Diggs production profile, they're the ones that wind up hitting the most if I draft from this area. That's how you should look at like win rates, at least for players. For roster construction, similar path. You can look at different roster constructions, and the way that I had laid it out especially for FFPC, is that you can look at a full roster construction. So for FFPC, since they use like 28 rounds, of course, like the roster is going to be much larger, but you can pick out like certain trends like within those builds, like almost every like the top, if I'm not mistaken, like either the top 8 or the top 10 roster constructions all drafted 3 quarterbacks and 3 tight ends. So that gives you that guideline of how many of each at the onesie positions you should take. And then I even broke it down farther to look at where they're investing in the early rounds. So in the first 6 rounds, it's a balanced approach. Maybe 1 or 2 tight ends, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, something along those lines. Not really using the robust approach where you're drafting like 4 running backs and then like 2 tight ends or something along those lines. Not to say it can't work, but again, if you're talking about, or if you're thinking in terms of how teams can be built optimally, that's how you would like typically approach drafts, and that's how win rate can you can leverage that in order to help you figure out, again, what are those guidelines, like those guardrails for when you go to draft players or when you try and build a particular roster in drafts.
Okay, good points and everything there. Joe, any thoughts on that? Do you factor this in?
I think the thing that really stuck out to me is like you don't go into a draft going, I have to get X player, right?
Yeah.
You should never do that, no matter what league you're in, no matter what kind of draft you're in. It doesn't matter. You have to look at it's almost
guilty.
Like, yeah, I mean it's. I mean, look, unless you got like one of the first 3 picks, exactly. Right? You can go, oh, okay, I'm going to take Dalvin. Like, okay,
right? Yeah,
I mean, like, right? You know what you're getting.
Yeah. All right.
You know, when you're back end or around 4, you're going, oh man, it's so and so players there. I'm absolutely taking him. Mm-hmm. But because you were so locked in on X player, you missed on this guy that fell 7 picks that shouldn't have. You've got to pay attention to that stuff, and I always say it, never use the league or the site that you're using, never use their ADP, never use their draft sheet. Use your own, because guys are going to fall to you, guaranteed. Mm-hmm. And I haven't fully comprehended like the win rate thing and things like that, but like I think it just kind of gives you a guideline, exactly what you were saying, Chris, of just kind of like, these are the types of players that you can look at in X round that are going to, like, I love the tight end one where it was like a bunch of guys that were like lower round draft picks that were like within the top 5 or whatever. And you were just kind of like, see, it didn't matter. Like they may not have been the best tight end, but they won their value.
Yeah. And that's
they outperformed their value phenomenally. And that's what it is.
And that's what we do, well, especially at that particular position where we wind up at least overestimating the value that each tight end will bring. So it's like we really need to focus on, and that's really how I'm approaching tight end this season. It's like, if I'm not getting one of those like top 5 guys, so it's like Kittle, it's Waller, it's Kelsey, it's Hawk, it's Andrews, and that's pretty much it. And like maybe Pitts, so I'll take 6 right there. So maybe Pitts.
Hawk is sort of an iffy one to me too, but I get it. The value should be there for him.
Yeah.
Right, but it's like all the rest of the guys after that, like maybe minus Dallas Goedert, but like all of them have their own like bugaboos attached to their situation. Like if it's Higbee, it's Thomas, it's Gesicki, it's Fant. I mean, there's all those guys that are still getting drafted in like the first like 10 rounds of each draft, but it's like we're hoping that they hit their projections. Like we're not certain that any of those guys are, but for the top 5, we're good with them. Like we can see past to them like meeting their projections, but the rest of them, it's like we'll look at those projections and be like, yep, I'm going to draft Noah Fant. He's a value. Or I'm going to take, like, I'm all in on Tyler Higbee this season. Like, he's definitely a value. But it's really based off of narrative and, like, the single point projections that we have here in June versus really taking a look at the production. And also on top of that, not really factoring in, going again back to the opportunity cost associated with each of those guys, where the wide receivers that are going around them can typically, like, will most likely outscore them anyway. So it's like, it's hard to balance like both of those things as we're navigating through drafts.
I will say that's the hardest thing I've had to do, and we'll move on to the next target after this, or the next topic after this. But that's the hardest thing I've had to do with tight ends is adjust to the fact that they're the higher end guys. Their value draft position is so much more than like the receiver I could have gotten there, even though they're going to get outscored by 50 points. But it's kind of like I can find another receiver 3 rounds later that's going to be so close, but the next tight end is 100 points lower. So I've adjusted to that this year. I feel like I'm trying to, and I did in the RT Sports. I even though Waller fell to me, I still was like, I mean, I second guessed it for a second. I was like, well, what does everybody else know that I don't? And then I was like, oh, no, God, click.
Yeah.
But and I do it all the time. I just don't draft the tight ends early. Because I think like the position doesn't matter, but these top end guys are so good. It's so much better than the rest of them. You might hit, last year I swore we were all going to hit on Hayden Hurst. Nope.
Yeah.
And I mean, so I waited on Hayden Hurst like crazy. And, it's worked in some years and last year it didn't. So I think I'm going to adjust, unfortunately. Well, hopefully, fortunately, I guess.
Yeah, but nobody thought that they were going to hit on Logan Thomas. I mean, nobody drafted Logan Thomas. He was free until a couple weeks into the season. It's like, all right, let's pay attention.
Yeah, Logan Thomas is actually good, guys.
He had a phenomenal season.
Jeff likes this. Go Hokies.
That's right.
All right, moving on here. I want to get to the last kind of more strategy question here is how do you value like safe floor players versus guys that are boom bust?
I think when it comes to looking at the safe floor players, I'm more looking for it. Just to me, it depends on where you're at in the draft. The safe floor players, the guys that we know are getting like projected volume, like those are the guys that I consider to be safe floor. Like, I mean, if you want to consider guys like the slot receivers that are typically going in like rounds 5 through 8, also have a safe floor. So like the archetype of, let's say, like a Jarvis Landry, somewhere in those ranges. A Tyler Lockett that we know at least is going to see like a decent number of targets like week in and week out. Most of those guys, they are guys that I'm going to wind up taking, but I also look for the ceiling at the same time. To me, it's not one or the other. It's really like, if I can get the floor, will I also get the ceiling as well? So that's where a guy like Jarvis Landry, like he might wind up getting dinged a bit because we don't really see the ceiling with Jarvis. We do typically see the floor. Whereas guys that are going around Jarvis Landry, if I'm remembering correctly, at least over at Underdog, I mean, Marquise Brown is going around the same time as Jarvis Landry is, and those are completely different players, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we see the safe floor with Jarvis, but we see the boom potential with Marquise Brown. So but that's where also you need to take a look at your entire roster and see like, well, what really works for my team at this point?
Agreed.
Like, do you really have the, not necessarily the luxury, but is your team made up of guys where you can afford to take a safe floor guy, or can you also take on the risk of, let's say, like a Mike Williams later? And that's where it goes back to
2 guys I was going to bring up.
Yeah, because it goes back to the decisions that you made early in the draft. Like, did you wind up going the robust RB route to the point where you passed up on the Tyreek Hills, the Stephon Diggs, the AJ Browns, and and then your draft started off with, let's say, like Deontay Johnson, like that was like he was your very first wide receiver. That's where you might want to pivot in terms of thinking about like the type of receiver you would want as your wide receiver 2 versus your wide receiver 3. Versus for me, I'm aiming for ceiling at that point, like once Marquise Brown comes around, because I have most of those guys already. Like I have the guys that project for the floor, that have the floor and ceiling combo. And then if I want to, I can inject my roster with some of that risk with some of those guys that are going on in the later rounds, because at that point, it doesn't matter. For me, it's like icing on the cake at that point. Yeah. I know I have projected targets. I know I have projected high value touches. So give me the guys that are also going to be able to really like make my roster pop at that point, versus some of the other guys that's like, I don't really care about, let's say, even if like the contract issues were going on with Jamison Crowder, it's like, I don't really, do I want that guy, or do I want to swing for the fences with, let's say, Dwayne Eskridge? Or,
yeah. Do you want 6 for 50, or do you want, every week, if you're going to even get that, or do you want, a bunch of dud weeks and then whatever? And yeah, you brought up Mike Williams in a perfect. I was going to ask you about him. Like, I took him at the very end of my draft, and I got a bunch of solid, good receivers. I got Jefferson, I got Thielen, I got Lamb, I forget who else, but there was a bunch of good, really solid receivers that I can rely on, I felt like. And then at the very end, I was like, why is Mike Williams still sitting here? And I get it. He's got like 4 good weeks in him. Fine.
That might be all you need, though.
That's all I need from him at this point.
That's really all you need. I mean, there's something to be said about taking guys that can churn out like usable weeks, and especially in a, like, let's say in a tournament setting, that might be what you need. Where most folks might be swinging for the fences, really you just want to be able to accumulate points on a week-to-week basis, and that's where some of those floor guys might be able to get you there. So, but the other guys, like there might be guys towards the back end of the draft. Like I've seen folks like draft like Tutu Atwell, like Kadarius Toney. I've seen like going towards the back end of drafts. I mean, Deshaun Jackson's being drafted like fairly decent bit with the hype around the LA Rams. But it's like those guys that really, like, you really have to squint to see them giving you more than like 1 to 2 usable weeks. Whereas some of those other floor guys, like even Elijah Moore, who I know his ADP is probably like on a rocket ship at this point. Yeah. It's like, we just want guys that are going to be able to give us 8 to 12 points on a weekly basis, which most of those guys that I just mentioned can.
Mike Williams' bad weeks are still like 6 points. So I'm still
usable.
Fine with that. So it's just one of those like, and the reason why I asked this question was, you see guys who just overvalue boom players, I feel like, in best ball. They're like, oh, I just need like 3 or 4 of these guys to hit every week. So I'm just going to go after all like the big guys that are just going to blow up. Aside from like maybe the first 5 rounds, they're just going to go with the typical guys. But after that, it's all the Deshaun's and things like that. Mm-hmm. You see those rosters year in and year out in best ball, and you're kind of like, have fun.
Yeah.
It's not going to work, man.
Yeah. So speaking of Deshaun, though, I mean, it's a perfect segue again, because my follow-up to this is really, he's a guy who obviously has some injury issues too. Mm-hmm. So he's kind of a bit of an anomaly with this question.
Risky.
Well, yeah, anomaly equals risky, we'll say. But he's getting a lot of hype again because of this boom potential that he has. But I mean, how do you value guys that may have been a safer floor for you, but then they change teams? Are you just writing them off completely? Obviously it would depend on who it is, but like a Julio versus a Deshaun, that's an easy one. But some of these mid-tier guys that you were used to their safe floors, and they did have some good ceiling potential, whether it was consistent or very boom bust. But I mean, are you finding yourself just reeling back on some of these guys?
In some cases, yes. And I've been doing enough drafts that I've figured out like where some of my blinders are at. Not necessarily for the wide receivers changing teams, but their team situation changing. And like one of the examples that comes to mind are the Colts guys. So like all of those pass catchers that are associated with that, like whether it's like Hilton, Pittman, Campbell coming back. I mean, I was good with them last season, but now we don't know what to expect out of Carson Wentz. Like, which version of Wentz are we going to get? Are we going to get the 2020, like, just complete implosion version of him? Or are we going to get the 2017, 2018, like when he was on like the Super Bowl run and all that stuff? Yeah. I mean, when he was actually like a decent quarterback, which since he's attached to Frank Reich, who is within Philadelphia, I can see that path. Mm-hmm. But again, trying to look at the other, like the company that those wide receivers keep in terms of ADP, I would much rather take the floor, or at least some sort of, at least a better outlook or a team outlook for some of the guys going around each of them. That it's just, I figured out that's where one of my blinders are at, because I agree with you, AJ. I would much rather take the security for some of the targets and the offensive situation with the guys going around him than trying to figure out, all right, so even in this 3 wide receiver set of Hilton, Pittman, and Campbell, I mean, who's going to get those targets? And what quality of targets are they going to be, considering Carson Wentz is going to be their quarterback? That's where, I mean, especially for in Pittman's case, I know as of right now, Michael Pittman's going as like the wide receiver 48 on Underdog, and around him, like Mike Williams is going like right before him. And guys like Mecole Hardman, Devontae Parker are going like right after him. And I would much rather, I mean, at that point, if you're comparing those situations, I would definitely rather have Mike Williams. And then do I want Mecole Hardman, who's attached to Patrick Mahomes? I can talk myself into that. Do I want Devontae Parker, who we think is going to at least have at least a better connection with Tua now in his second year? I can talk myself into that as well.
Like, he's got some new company too.
He's got some new company. So I mean, but we'll see.
He may not even be there still.
Right. So he'll be there, but
so that's where
maybe.
I mean, so that's where I try to, at least that's where I would make ties in favor of the security of that offensive situation versus trying to figure out whether or not, like, what that team situation is going to look like. But again, that goes back, but I'm not doing it and sacrificing opportunity cost. It's really just about looking around at similar ADPs and making that determination that way.
Okay, good.
All right, so you've mentioned a few rookies here, and how do you go about valuing rookies for best ball drafts? You know, aside from like the Najee Harris, right, who's obviously in a pretty good spot here, but some of these receivers that are high end, but hit or miss. Other running backs kind of hit or miss. Like, how do you typically value rookies for best ball?
I don't. No, I'm just kidding.
I mean, I kind of did. I'm
terribly.
Yeah, terribly. No, they're all bad. Stay away from them and just let me draft them. With running backs, I think the signal is like it's fairly linear when it comes to running backs. If you have high draft capital, you get the right situation, then they're typically wind up going in that like 3rd, 4th round, and their ADP kind of ascends like throughout the offseason. I mean, we saw this coming with Jonathan Taylor last year. J.K. Dobbins to an extent as well, but when he got sent to Baltimore, it was kind of like, we don't know what's going to happen with Mark Ingram still being a part of that offense. But this season, I mean, Najee Harris and Travis Etienne, I mean, regardless of what we think about Urban Meyer, like attached Urban Meyer down in Jacksonville, Etienne and Najee Harris, both with their draft capital, they project to have decent volume. Harris more so, obviously, because he's replacing pretty much everything that Connor left behind. Also takes up some passing game work as well. That's the type of profile, that's the archetype of running back that you would want in the early rounds anyway. With wide receivers, it's a bit different. I mean, draft capital does help us, but we do know that it's at least a position that requires some time with the quarterback to establish a rapport. And so I typically don't try and get too much. I don't try and spend too high draft capital on rookie wide receivers. Jamar Chase is like really pushing like the edge on that. And that's a personal bias because he is a part of the Bengals, and you can see the Cincinnati hat like hanging behind me. So I do have a blinder in terms of taking him there, but
the quarterback receiver combo is already there.
Yeah, no, and the LSU connection.
I mean, hey, man.
I've
Tigers.
I've rationalized that pick since it was made on draft night, and I get it. But like for the rest of the rookie wide receivers, it's again looking at ADP, like the guys that are going around some of the rookies that are currently being drafted. I would rather take the veterans that are going at the same cost. I mean, minus Elijah Moore. right? I think Elijah Moore is the one that I think from a athletic profile standpoint, draft capital standpoint, like team situation standpoint, he's the one I think that makes the most sense in my mind as the one that will probably provide the most value in year one. But it's like Rondell Moore, Rashad Bateman. I mean, I've seen Dwayne Eskridge getting drafted. We mentioned Tutu Atwell earlier. I mean, so many of those other rookies that are getting drafted, but it's like, where's the projectable targets? Like, where do we really see that value coming for them in their rookie season? And that's where I would much rather pivot to the veterans that are being taken at cost, because we do know what their role is. We do know that they can churn out those usable weeks on a year-to-year basis. And so unless the rookie is coming at a much discounted price, so like Elijah Moore, like his ADP is palatable to me, palatable to me, I would much rather take like those guys versus betting on like Jamar Chase or like anybody else, even though despite the fact of like my Bengals fandom and whatnot.
No, I totally get it. I usually shy away from rookies, especially receivers. Last year burned me bad because they were all phenomenal randomly, it felt like. But, the running backs seem to be in a much better spot to be able to just go in, although I am a little gun-shy on ETN. I'm just not sure how that's going to work. And
I get that.
Talking about putting him a receiver only, like, what are you talking about, Urban Meyer? Like, you're out of your mind. And I've never liked Urban Meyer anyway, so
but that's an Urban Meyer urban
from
legend.
Ohio.
I mean,
like
that's what it is. And I'm a huge Gators fan and have been since the Spurrier days until he freaking screwed himself and went to Washington. That was retarded. Sorry, I don't like that word.
The Washington
word is a horrible word. Yeah, it really was.
I nicknamed one of my fantasy team the Washington Gators one year.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, because it was that's really what happened. Werfel and you name it, they all came in.
the old ball coach coming in.
That's how long I've been doing this.
Nope, not happening. Different league, different standards, and everything, and he found that out. But
pretty quickly.
I think overall it's just rookies are.
That's why it's hard to buy into Pitts, even, man. Like I still like it's a rookie. I mean, it is hard to buy into it. Although
guy, it's just you look at it, you think that they're gonna have some hype and everything, and there is true talents. But even for me, Najee Harris, he's awesome. I mean, he is phenomenal talent, and Pittsburgh is a team that just seems to always have 15 running backs that can go out and try to do something, and none of them pan out. I don't think that that's the case with Harris. I think he is special enough talent that he will buck that trend. I mean, hell, Connor came out of absolutely nowhere when Bell decided to hold out. So I like his upside way more, and he's someone I'd be comfortable taking. But you mentioned ETN. I don't know. I don't know what I want to even think about that. And then, I mean, receiver, these past 2 years have been so deep with rookie receivers coming out, and somehow the Eagles have managed to take the worst possible one out of the bunch.
Might have been the coaching staff
and
not being able to coach.
Yes, that's highly likely. Or the GM who sucks goats.
I don't think Rieger's bad. I think that
I think Rieger's good. Year. But the thing that annoyed me the most was that
Rieger,
all they were doing was showing Justin Jefferson clips when the Eagles were on the clock, and then they're like, Jalen Rieger. I'm like, wrong purple. What are you doing? What the hell is this?
Should have been Justin Jefferson.
That one did surprise me.
They absolutely should have taken Jefferson, and you saw that. But yeah. So speaking of rookies and not wanting to go after them, the next obvious question here is, what other players are you fading right now?
So from the running back position, I think I mentioned him earlier. It's J.K. Dobbins for me is the guy that I'm fading the most at ADP. I never got his third round price tag the moment that the best ball lobbies opened, because I don't know if I'm a degenerate. I was doing best balls like almost immediately after the Super Bowl because I couldn't help myself. And I saw J.K. Dobbins going off the board. I was like, what are we doing, guys? Yeah. It doesn't make any sense
That's
to me.
hilarious that you say that, by the way. I literally just saw a tweet. Somebody said, first player you think of when you see, I like him better in best ball. One of the first answers, J.K. Dobbins. I'm 100% with you. I'm laughing at it.
I don't even like him in best. I don't understand why you would like him in best ball, because the guys that you're taking him over, I mean, he's still.
No. They're talking about that safe floor with these other guys, and in that area of the draft. I get it, man.
It doesn't make any sense. I mean, I get the fact that from a usage standpoint, over I think the last 6 games of the season, he led the entire backfield, including Lamar Jackson, in terms of red zone touches, scored a touchdown in 4 straight games. I mean, that was the back end of last season, and now folks are trying to extrapolate both that usage and that efficiency over now a 17 game sample, and now winding up with him being in the 3rd round. I can't do that math. I can't do that mental gymnastics to save my life.
The split workload there is just too much for me. I'm totally in agreement with you. I mean, what everybody's doing is they're going, oh, Mark Ingram had a phenomenal season 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Do you realize the touchdown efficiency that guy had? It was out of this world good. So I'm 100% with you.
Yeah, and I don't see how, even if their coaching staff is talking up having him being a more involved in the passing game, okay, that's great. So what, his 2.5 3% target share kicks up to 4%?
And and 4% in the least worst passing offense in the league.
Right. I mean, they've been dead last in terms of red zone passing 2 straight years. They've led no, they haven't led the league. They've been top 3 in terms of total rushing touchdowns across the league for the past 2 seasons. I mean, this is a rushing offense. So regardless of even if he does get a few extra targets, I mean, this is not an archetype that we would want to target this early in the draft. And especially after they went out and they gave Gus Edwards a 2nd round tender. On top of that, they come back and give him the $10 million, the 2-year $10 million extension on top of that. That's Kenyon Drake money, by the way. So it's they can't give us any more signals that this is not
Kenyon Drake.
Yeah,
let's go ahead and weigh those.
But you can't give any more signals to the rest, the public, watching this team, and say that J.K. Dobbins is going to be get the same type of workload as the guys that he's currently being drafted around. It just ain't going to happen.
There's no way. I mean,
totally
this is a run first offense and a pump fake second offense. There's no throwing the ball, and it's just split up way too much for every series, every rushing attempt, I feel like, and Lamar's just gonna tuck and run when he can, and I mean, he's been successful at it. And I'm
all for the receivers too on this team, honestly. Both of them.
Yeah, I'm off the Baltimore running back train right now. It's more of a train wreck in my opinion, because you don't know what you're gonna get. And I mean, even for best ball, talk about boom or bust and floor. You have no idea what that floor is.
No.
Other than very low. So yeah, I would be moving off that as well.
Yeah, I mean,
any other fades you got?
The only other wide receiver that comes to mind that I'm currently fading at cost. Who is the guy that I was thinking about? It's unfortunately it is Jamar Chase for me. I'd say that because I'm trying to, I guess, partially dabble in taking him just because of the Bengals fandom, but at the same time, it's we know that the Bengals their pass attempts is going to be top of the league most likely, but for the passing volume overall, I mean, we can definitely see a case where it's Jamar Chase kind of leading with a 24-25% target share, T. Higgins having maybe just a couple percentage points less than him, and then Tyler Boyd having a couple percentage points less than them.
It's pretty split, yeah.
Yeah, fairly split.
Yeah.
But Jamar Chase is going a round and a half ahead of T. Higgins. T. Higgins is going 2 rounds ahead of Tyler Boyd. It's their ADPs are so split.
Yeah.
Give me the cheaper guys at that point.
Yeah,
I'd much rather have T. Higgins at cost than Jamar Chase.
100%. And I actually did that in my best ball league. I took him a few rounds later and was like, all right, same guy.
Yeah.
And he's he's proven almost a little more at this point. Like, you never know what you're going to get with these rookies. So, like, I'm not taking him ahead of a guy who's already done it. All right. So, you've mentioned some fades, AJ. Next question.
So, moving on, obviously, what are your great value picks?
So my value picks, at least for running backs at the earlier rounds, a guy that I've been finding myself taking quite a bit in the early rounds, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Right now, falling towards like the back end of the second round, like even about where we were talking about where J.K. Dobbins is getting drafted at. I don't care like what you think about his rushing efficiency from last season, but if we look at the changes that they made to the offensive line, I mean, completely overhauled that. I mean, they get rid of Damian Williams in the offseason, so at least we can think of his like target started to bump up as well. I mean, if this is still going to be an efficient offense, I mean, top 3, top 5 in terms of offensive points per or offensive yards per drive, offensive points per drive. Mahomes still being like the quarterback 1 of the league. Give me Clyde Edwards-Helaire at his like reduced cost, considering he was top 6, top 7 pick
like
last
RB
year.
6-7 last year was crazy.
Yeah. And so now he's like RB 12. I'll take that. I'll take that discount.
Sometimes
production
farther.
Yeah. I'll take that discount all day long.
Yeah,
And
he was the best call that I had the entire draft, and Joe can tell you a little bit more about that one.
Nope, we're moving on.
Nailed it.
Any other value picks that you like?
Like I think at wide receiver, I think I already mentioned him. Like T. Higgins is a guy that I've been drafting. I've been trying to like draft as much as possible. I mean, from a targets perspective, like he hasn't relied on volume like Tyler Boyd, like who primarily worked out of the slot. I mean, T. Higgins was seeing more downfield targets during the earlier parts of the season. Now I know that since they switched from like Joe Burrow to Andy Dalton and like Ryan Finley for a time, I know that we can't really take a lot of that to stock, but just like seeing his ADOT fluctuate from, I think around like 13.5 in the earlier parts of the season down to around like somewhere in between like 11 and 12. At least it shows that he's capable of being more than just like that, like deep threat and like running like post patterns or anything like that. He can be an intermediate route runner. So if we're already seeing Jamar Chase and he's going to come in and profile as the X receiver in that offense, like give me the guy that's going to be playing opposite him with like getting like similar volume to him as well. And going like I said earlier, about a round and a half later.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. I already said I agreed. So just real quick, like, besides those two that you've mentioned, who have been some of the guys that you have found yourself targeting and drafting the most? And I know Underdog breaks that down for us. I'm just kind of curious, like, who are some guys you found on your teams more than anybody?
I've been stubborn about Darrell Henderson.
Okay.
But I've been stubborn about him since he came into the league. I don't know, like Memphis backs. I don't know, man. But like Hendo, I've been drafting like quite a bit. Like Darius Slayton, I've been grabbing like super late because
I can see that. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, man.
He's super late. He's super cheap. So why not?
I'm still a Slayton believer, man.
Kenny
got the jersey to give away at the expo.
I know.
You guys are going.
I know the whole like the Kenny Galladay trade. They drafted Tony and all that stuff. They still got Shep, Ingram, like the whole like too many mouths to feed cliche, like blah blah blah. But like Darius Slayton, he's a good player.
Yeah, he's
like,
solid.
He's a good player. So like for him to be completely like from an ADP perspective phased out of that offense.
Shepard's gonna get hurt half the year, so who knows with Galladay anymore? So
right, and I'm just wondering.
Could fall into injury concern now. So
exactly.
Yeah, I'm just wondering why Slayton is the one that gets completely pressed out of that offense. And when we know that he could be a wide receiver 1 because we've seen him do it beforehand, if a potential wide receiver 1 is available in like the rounds like 15 in a draft, I'm probably going to take that guy. Like, and again, that could just be me being stubborn, but I don't know. And then of course, like the last guy that I'll mention, this goes back to my Bengals love, but like Gio Bernard, I don't know about like Leonard Fournette. Like he got hot like towards the end of the regular season into the playoffs. We never know like how long like Ronald Jones, like what that leash is between him and Bruce Arians. Like he could get yanked off the field for missing some sort of pass protection or anything like that, dropping a pass. Like Lord knows what's going to happen or how many games he'll miss if he fumbles.
You breathed wrong. Get off the field.
Like get off the field. But like I can see like Gio Bernard, like he's the cheapest of them. It's an ambiguous backfield because we don't know who's really going to lead the charge on a weekly basis, and we know that he can be both a runner between the tackles and he catches passes, and he's going to be catching passes from Tom Brady. So
he could be James White and more.
Yeah, why not take him? Like
because he can actually run the ball too. Like James White
he
really
actually has a skill set. So
yes, I'll take that guy towards the back end of drafts all the time.
That's not a bad one there. I like that. So, all right, Chris, that is all we got, man. I really want to thank you for coming on again. Great talk, great information. I hope everybody learned a lot. I know we did. Before you go, let everybody know where they can find you on the internet and all that good stuff, man.
You can find me on Twitter at Chris Allen FFWX. All my writing, particularly during the off season, is over at 444 because they allow me to like dive into the weeds and like gab for like 2,000 words on stuff like FFPC win rates and like all that good stuff. But I'll be getting back to like over the next month or so. I'll be diving back into weather. So again, like the FFWX, the WX in my handle is for weather. So I'm be diving back into some research for that, like in the next month or so. So you see some more articles regarding like weather and its impact on fantasy football from me here in the next couple of weeks. But other than that, you hate any of my takes, want to come draft with me in Underdog, come hit me up. I'll start a draft anytime.
Yeah, man. I'll be throwing out some draft invites soon. So you're gonna have to come kill me on those.
No, I'll make some dumb mistakes or something like that. Like I'll probably work.
Yeah, like
I mean, I'm gonna learn. I'm gonna take everything. I'm gonna take everything. Yeah, no kidding. I'm gonna take everything you said and kill you. No, I'm just kidding. I'll take Swift in the second round. Yes.
And Jefferson round 3.
Exactly.
All right, man. It was a good show, man. We will definitely have you on again soon. Have a good night, man.
Anytime.
Right. Thanks, sir. Have a good one.
All right, AJ. I think that's all we got. It was a great show. I always love having Chris on, so I think we're just going to end it that way.
Always great information and good conversation. So
absolutely. Cheers, everybody. We will be here next week with AJ. You want to introduce the guest next week?
My friend and yours from Sirius XM's Fantasy Alarm Show. Mr. Howard Bender. Hello.
Hell yeah. We'll be here Wednesday night, not Thursday. We're having to change some up here coming soon, but it will be.
He's a genius. He is a friend of the show, and very excited to have him back on next week. We will be talking the AFC East. Yep. Tune in. It will be fun. I will have to. I've been doing my research recently and listening even more so closely to his show. So I will have to.
You have that long drive now, so
bring in a few points.
To the show a lot.
I have been.
It's a good time, man. I enjoy it. I miss my drive to work back because I can't listen to those shows as much.
Yeah, him and Bowden are fantastic.
They're funny, dude. I love it.
You know, Hanson Guru is out there as well, and he's been on the show. Been fantastic to listen to, so check us out next week for sure.
Cheers, everyone, and see you all next week. Peace.